and a few people on YouTube, so that was good. Mind you, I won't even repeat the discussion on YouTube. That was something else.
Really?
There was this guy trying to chat at this other guy. It was really weird. Don't even go there. All right. Zoom. Done. Right, we're live. We're live on Zoom now, so we're gonna. Oh yeah, have I got to get my image up on it? I'm not. My image ain't up here, is it?
No.
All right. Okay. Right. None. We'll have none. Okay. There. Oh, hang on. Okay. Right there. I'm not on here yet. Oh, okay. Right. Okay. There. Am I up on? Am I online yet?
We
Can you
can't
see me?
No.
Be faffing about with this all night now. Right. Okay.
Got your name on there.
Yeah. All right. Okay. There.
No.
No. Okay. There. There. Oh, Christ. 4 minutes later. No. Right. There. Why can't I get my image on the line? Blur.
Paying your
there.
bill?
What?
Did you paying your bill?
I wasn't paying my bloody bill. You wouldn't be on here otherwise. Like there. I'm still not there. Oh.
Hey,
What about that?
Hey.
I was pressing the wrong button. That was why. It does help if I'm pressing the right button, doesn't it? Right. Okay. Good. Good. Right. All right then, Richard. Any news from you tonight?
No, nothing of much interest.
Nothing about lion taming or anything?
No, nothing.
All right then. And what about you, Goff?
No. I mean, any archaeological news that I've noticed. Too much going on elsewhere, I think.
I think it's been, yeah, it has been really quiet. I got to be honest with you. Yeah, it has been quiet. So I'm just, oh, here we go. I got you guys online now on my old laptop. I've got somebody trying to sell me a barrel of whiskey. Have you ever invested in whiskey?
No, don't like the stuff.
No, like investing in the stuff.
No.
All right then.
Oh, scams around mine. No, I've read.
All right then. Right. What about you, Goff? Anything you've got to say?
No, nothing. No, I haven't got any news.
Okay.
No.
Right. So we'll get straight into it.
Yeah.
Pat joined us last night, so she won't be on us here. So, Oh, right. Yeah, I've remembered what I've got to do. I've got to get the wind. I'm using a different technology tonight. You know what always happens when I'm using a different technology? It doesn't always go well. Right. So, if I do that, I start clicking there. Wait a minute. We've got loads of images and there and that. Yeah, it's working. Good. Sorted. Right. Okay. Let's just get you online. There and share screen. Start. And go. Go. Just go. Right. Okay. There we go. And there it is. Have you got that on the screen?
Yeah.
Is that better this week? Anyway, so we're going to be looking at Carthage, and we're trying to link all this in with sort of the development of Rome. Now, the reason I'm glad that we're going to be looking at Carthage next week, because it gives me an opportunity to add in something that is very, very interesting, that the Carthaginians actually traded with British people hundreds and hundreds of years before the Romans were ever thought of. So we've got trade with the Carthaginians, and we'll be looking into that next week. And the wonderful thing with the trade with the Carthaginians is that it's to do with tin. So this is a little bit of an introduction of one of those people that the Romans were avidly fighting against, and being very influential in the development of the Roman world. And I do believe
Henry.
that is a wonderful is that, who's that?
Henry.
All right, Henry's just joined us, which is brilliant. So what we've got to start off with.
Zam now as well.
Oh, Christ almighty, we should have waited for them as usual. God.
7 o'clock start.
Yeah, 7 o'clock start. We've already started anyway. Right. So Carthaginians. What we know about the Carthaginians, we've got Hannibal, and they're called the Punic Wars because the Romans referred to the Carthaginians as the Punic people. Right. So that's why we've got the title, the Punic Wars. Punic Wars 3, 2, 1. So the first Punic War ended in not massive disaster for the Carthaginians. You got the second part, Punic War, which wasn't very successful for the Carthaginians, and then you've got the final Punic War, which was absolutely disastrous for the Carthaginians. Now, Hannibal, the man with the elephants going over the Alps, is associated with the second Punic War. So this is something that I learnt about when I was in school, and I asked everybody last night, did you learn about the Punic Wars in school? And everybody said no. So I knew about Hannibal and the elephants going over the Alps. We had to do little things in books and stuff, and the Battle of Zama and the Battle of Cannae. One of these was a victory. The Battle of Cannae was a massive victory for Hannibal. And the Battle of Zama was a massive victory for Rome. So we're looking at this initial chart now. If we start with my notes in front of me, which is not off the internet at all, most if practically all of what we'll be doing from now on will be taken from one of my 300 books on the Roman world. So facing each other across the Messina Straits, we've got Messina Straits are basically there. Messina, tomato, and we've got the foot of Italy and Sicily. So this is where conflict between the Romans and the Carthaginians was happening. And the Carthaginians were about from way before the 800 years BC. Rome didn't even exist. So you could say the world of Carthage is a world that was at its height a little bit before the start of the first Punic War, which is 264 BC. And then what we have is that slowly but surely, after 100 years, Rome takes everything from the Carthaginians, as Rome seems to take everything from everybody else. On the map there, you've got the word Etruria, the Etruscans, Tuscany. That's really, really important. And that's really important to another story. But what we've got across here, we've got cross swords, lots of battles, the battles that were being fought between the Romans and the Carthaginians going through Italy in this successful campaign of Hannibal. And he came so close to Rome that Hannibal just his troops marched around Rome. They weren't able to capture it, right? And we'll talk about that as we go through all these different things and so on. So we're not going to do all these battles, but what we are going to do is next week we'll be doing Zama, we'll mention a little bit about the Battle of Cannae, which is that great Hannibal victory. We mention this sea battle of Myla. And the Sea Battle of Myla is something that I can remember from 11 years old when we looked at Hannibal and the campaign, and something I was told by a history teacher, Eugene Phillips. And Mr. Phillips said that the Carthaginians were very successful over the Romans until the Romans captured a Carthaginian ship. And up until that point, the Romans were not good seafarers. They weren't great at building ships, but they captured this Carthaginian ship, which was washed up on the shoreline, and they took it apart and they rebuilt it, nuts and all. And then they built a whole fleet based on this Carthaginian vessel, and then eventually that would lead to the downfall of the Carthaginians. So it's really, really important to think about all this, and we've got a nice group of people watching online as well, so that's good. We've got 9 people online. So let's get into some of the facts and figures, and just something else chucking in here. The red line there is the March of Hannibal. So this is the Second Punic War. We'll put all the dates and stuff in a short while. We've got charts about all that as well. And then we've got the green stuff is where the Romans started off, and the orange stuff is where the Carthaginians started off. And eventually, by the year 146 BC, the Carthaginians were nowhere left to be seen. They were no more on the playing field. So one of the things I do is absolutely love maps. You know, when I was sort of from about 10, 11 years old, I had a big map of the Vale of Glamorgan on my wall. Which was 1 to 25,000 scale map. It was all over my wall, and I put little pins on this big board that I had on the wall, and tumuluses, Roman sites, castles, and eventually one by one I visited every single site in the Vale of Glamorgan with my granddad, which was good practice for my later life. I do love maps, and again, when we're looking at this, it sort of shows those 2 big battles, Cannae and Zama, and basically, Zama was the equivalent of Waterloo, except Hannibal is Napoleon. Do you know what I mean? He's the loser. But he wasn't a loser for a very long time. And there's another figure in all this called Scipio. There's several Scipios, but there's one Scipio, one big Scipio in this whole story, who eventually defeats Hannibal. 1 minute, Scipio's defeated at Cannae. His Roman legions are wiped off the field, and then at the Battle of Zama, Scipio is then victorious over Hannibal. One of the things to say about all of this is the very root of understanding this in the sense of history. The wars that the Romans are having between the Carthaginians are extremely long wars. They're not just a couple of years. They're decades, right? And it's decades of conflict between the Romans and the Carthaginians. So what we've got is, you can see earlier on, there's no Rome isn't in Greece. It's not in Greece in the 270s, but by you've got the 200s, the Romans are taking over Greece, and they've taken over a big chunk of the territory of the Carthaginians. Again, this is just an overview. This is a little bit of an overview. And one of the things that somebody said last night is that they'd never heard of any of this, and I just thought, that's good. You've learned something tonight. And so what we've got is, this is just a bit of a campaign map of the bits that have been added by Rome bit by bit. So by the year 146 BC, what was still being controlled by the Carthaginians, right, was eventually seized by Rome completely. And they wiped the Carthaginians off the map. They wiped the Carthaginians off the map so much that the city of Carthage was a place that nobody could live for a long time. In fact, even the people who survived the fighting between the Carthaginians and the Romans had their fields salted. The Romans spread fields with salt, so the Carthaginians couldn't feed themselves. This is how brutal the Romans were, and they killed in the year 146 BC up to 750,000 people. In fact, most of them burnt to death in Carthage. They just set the city alive. Now, I wanted to chuck this in here. This is really, really important. I have mentioned this before. This is about the Roman fear of invasion. This is about the Roman fear of the eternal city being captured. Now, what I simply mean by that is that Rome had faced its city being captured by the people of Gaul. And there you've got some dates. So you've got after the Gauls sacked Rome in 390, the Romans were continually fearful for there and evermore. The eternal city of Rome would never ever be captured again until about 409 AD 409. So it remained intact for 800 years with nobody capturing it. And you could say that's similar to the city of London today. So this is something, and by the city being sacked by the Gauls in 390, by the time that Hannibal is in the 200s BC, heading towards Rome, when he gets to the walls of Rome, it's impregnable. The Romans built the great Servian wall, some 7.5 meters high. You put in 2 meters of foundation on that. So if you look at the foundations, that's 10 meters tall. This wall, it's quite a tall wall, tall deal. When it was completed in 378 BC, the wall made the city all but impregnable to later attacks. And I'll just got to check this in here. Rome was eventually captured in 409 AD 409 because it was so captured within. The Roman people were betrayed by people who were fighting for them and with them. So Rome fell. So this is what we're talking about. Rome could only be defeated internally. I keep saying that. I've said that so many times. So again, what we've got here is this. I've mentioned things like this before, that the reconstructions of these are usually wrong. And the reason why I'm saying the reconstructions are wrong, the artist who created this over 100 years ago has decided to put the people in the illustration in later uniforms. So this is not something that would be atypical for a scene going back to the Battle of Zama, this in the year 202 BC. So as the caption would say there, the meeting of well, it's in my notes in front of me, the meeting of the Roman general Scipio and his opponent Hannibal just before the Battle of Zama in 202 BC is one of the most famous encounters in history. Scipio crushed Hannibal's army the following day. This again this could be classed alongside the likes of Waterloo. Carthage. It's not fair for me to compare Carthage with Napoleon's empire, but in many ways I will do that. But eventually this would be the downfall of Hannibal, the Battle of Zama, and the terms were that Carthage would be reduced to a very, very small state indeed. So again, the likening of that is, you've got the Romans on the right, and you've got Hannibal on the left. You've got Scipio on the right, and Hannibal on the left. But obviously, Scipio was wearing a uniform of roughly around AD 100, something which would be very familiar to Marcus Aurelius. But other than that, it's a nice scene. And also, one thing I've wondered about this image is why are they portraying a battle that's already ended when in fact it hadn't even started because there's dead bodies running around? There you go. It makes it artistically interesting. So again, what we are looking at is something I want to do next week is I want to look at Carthaginian architecture, and I'm going to chuck a bit of the Etruscans in next week. And I remembered the reason, one of the key reasons why I was doing my live shows, right, was to look at the Etruscan world, and I never ever did it. I concentrated on Wales, which is one of those weird things. But when we think about architecture, is that the Romans seem to steal their sense of architecture off everybody, right? And we've got to understand that from a Carthaginian point of view. So that's exactly what we're going to be looking at next week and having a little look at the Etruscans. So by roughly about 150 years BC, 100 years BC, Rome was developing its own distinctive architecture. And what we've got, we go through the different orders, we go through Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, and the Corinthian is the eventual style that the Romans actually adopt. So when this is the reason why we're doing this, to sort of learn a little bit more of the background to Rome, but it's going to be a long learning background to Rome. And as I said to the guys before Henry joined and Anne joined, I mentioned that there's evidence to say that the Carthaginians traded with the Britons well before the Romans, and you know that's an interesting factor in itself. So one of the things that I learned when we were learning this in my first year of comprehensive school was the fact that the Carthaginians used elephants, and the Carthaginians regularly used elephants and the tanks of ancient warfare. But the one thing that I would say is that once the Romans had learned how to deal with the Carthaginians and their elephants, the elephants weren't a very successful weapon in battle. And again, thinking about all this, the Romans were very much into learning and adapting to the ways of Carthaginian fighting. So eventually, this is what led to Carthage losing against Rome. So again, the word Punic basically refers to the Carthaginians. But this at the top here, as we're getting into this is that great battle of Cannae, Cannae, which Hannibal was greatly victorious over Scipio at Lake Trezemi, which we'll look at the end before that leads us on to next week. This battle could be said to be one of Rome's greatest defeats. The Roman army was so completely wiped off the field, right? The Romans learned from it. This was Rome's equivalent to the British army laying down its arms at Singapore, right? This is how big this is to the Romans, and how difficult it was for the British to deal with Singapore when they surrendered Singapore to the Japanese in the Second World War. So there's a little bit of a metaphor. So this is in the year 217, and again, the Hannibal basically pushed the Roman army into the lake and drowned them all, basically. And the interesting thing about this, the Roman writers actually tell us that that's what the Carthaginians did. It's a very odd one that for once the writing about this war by the Romans say that the Romans were actually total pants on the battlefield. So again, painting this picture of the Carthaginians, the Punic War, the first Punic War, the Western Mediterranean, just before the start of the war in 264. Rome is shown in red, Carthage in green. Start again. Rome is shown in red, Carthage in grey and Syracuse in green. I don't know why I said that then. So again, a little bit more background about the Carthaginians. Way back in 409 BC, the Rome and Carthage were on friendly terms, but in 509 BC, Rome was a piss pot place where modern day Rome is. It was a tiny place, right? So Rome just said, "Hi, boys. We'll just be friends with you." The Carthaginians had no idea that Rome would be this great power one day, and Rome would one day in the year 1406 completely wipe out Carthage off the face of the earth, right? Yeah, you could basically say that it was an extermination. The Romans hated the Carthaginians so much because the Carthaginians had defeated Rome. They wanted to exact revenge. So within the case of 120 odd years, this would be what would happen. Three wars, the three Punic Wars. But there would be slow tensions. Carthage founded itself roughly around 814 BC. Rome didn't exist. Rome wasn't even thought about. Rome was nowhere. Rome wasn't even anywhere. It wasn't until 753 that Romulus and Remus, the foundation story, Abu Conti, the foundation of Rome, 753 BC. So that's well over 50, 60 years after the Carthaginians are out there, conquering the world. The Carthaginians, in many ways, existed well before the 800s because they started their origins basically as traders, Phoenician traders, the Lebanese Phoenician traders, where modern day Lebanon is the Levant. Carthage extended its power to all the occupiable areas in North Africa, except for Egypt. And interesting enough, Egypt itself really didn't have much of an army, but the Carthaginians traded with them. They didn't conquer them, right? So so when you think about it, so Carthage extended its power Tangier into Spain. Malaga, they founded Malaga. Cadiz, they had control of Balearic Islands. Sardinia, Corsica, Sicily. And the one thing about Carthage, they were ruled slightly differently. Initially it was like a monarchy, and then it was like a republic, and then it was like a trading oligarchy, where Rome was basically a kingdom, a republic, senate, and all the rest of it. And then eventually, way after they conquered Carthage, became an empire. So the one problem that we see at the top is that the Carthaginians relied upon a mercenary army. Anyone that relies upon a mercenary army isn't going to do well. And they didn't pay their army either. So this was one of the problems. So the mercenary armies themselves were led by Carthaginian generals. So and if you're not going to pay mercenary armies, they're going to turn against you. And I think the only metaphor for that is, basically German officers leading Turkish troops in the First World War. It worked for a while, but then the Turkish troops stopped listening to the German officers, that type of thing. But on another level, what then happened is that when they didn't pay their mercenary armies would look for somebody to pay them. And so basically the Romans would eventually pay off the mercenary armies of the Carthaginians and then gain loads of territory. So, but the one thing that, even though the Romans were a good land power and they had a good land army, other than elephants, other than having Hannibal and they had Scipio, the Carthaginians naturally actually had a great navy. And so Syracuse is basically Greek. And if Goff loved that last film as I loved with Indiana Jones. Last year, right? His fifth film, and Syracuse was actually shown in that with the Roman invasion of Syracuse. But anyway, but the fact of the matter is, this is what we've got. So we've got the first Punic War between 264 and the year 241 BC. And as you can see, if you've got a war that lasts more than a few years, right, it's a few years too long. So if you want to compare so this is how to make comparisons. So if you look, for example, the American Civil War, give or take a few months, however way you look at it, it's the American Civil War, earlier part of 1861, all the way through to the eventual surrender of Johnson's army on the 26th of April, 1865. That's give or take a few months. That's 5 years, right? 4 years actually, but some you could argue it's 5. That would seem like a long war, and look how many things came out of the American Civil War, you know. And when we look at the First World War, if you give or take a few months, it's 5 years long, you know. And look how much happened in the First World War, right? However, right, when you look at this is the 23-year war. 23-year war between Carthage and the Roman Empire, and it's such a long war that the Carthaginians lose, and they lose control of Sicily, except Syracuse, that there's something else going on there. And then what we do have is, after a period of peace, you know, 241, a period of peace, 20 odd years, 23 years. You've got another war, another Carthaginian Punic War. And again, this next war is when the likes of Sardinia and Corsica have been absorbed, and the rest of Sicily have now been absorbed by the Roman world. Basically, the Corsicans and the Sardinian mercenaries fighting for the Carthaginians weren't paid, and they just went over to the Roman side, right? So what you've got 218, you've got this new war, this new Punic War, and this war runs until 201 BC. This is a war which goes on for 17 years, 17 long years. And then what happens is that the Carthaginians lose all their territory in the Iberian Peninsula, and you know this is changing times. This is slowly but surely they lose lots of their territories in Africa, and nothing's then going to happen. But what we've got in this first Punic War, second Punic War, this one here, between 218 and 201, is that this is the period of Hannibal. This is the guy in history. Hasdrubal Barca is and Mango Barca is dad and uncle respectively. Hannibal Barca, in other words. And you've got Scipio on the left-hand side. You've got a couple of Scipios there. These are the generals that are fighting the likes of Hannibal, where Hannibal just goes into obscurity after this whole campaign and the defeat at the Battle of Zama. And what really happens is that the Numidians become an independent people in themselves, an African independent people. And this is another point as well. When Western archaeologists argue that the Africans didn't have states, and they weren't accomplished people, and they were very backwards until they were conquered by the scramble for Africa in 1879. You know that's absolute nonsense, right? So Numidians are another independent African world that was created by the Romans and Carthaginians as a buffer people. And then what we then have is, and look at this, we've got in this second Punic War, what we do have is 1 minute, Syracuse, the Greeks on the side of the Romans, and then eventually they're on the side of Carthage, and Rome captures Syracuse, and Syracuse is no longer a Greek independent people within Sicily. So I wanted to chuck this map in here just to sort of say that this is what Rome would eventually look like in the West. So if you want to compare that map in 218, read up to 201, Rome is basically all the red stuff and stuff in Mauritania, yeah. And you've obviously got Spain, and Carthage is just left to just a little bit there around Carthage and so on, a little bit in Africa.
Oh, North
But
Africa.
hang on a minute, and so one of the things, if you want to see, this is what the Roman world would look like by around AD 100. So in other words, Rome is quite small at this time that we're talking about in the Punic War, but this is what it would become looking like in the West, and quickly.
It's sort of North Africa, really.
Yeah,
but yeah.
No, the Romans
and the rest.
the Romans on the other side. You've obviously got the rest of Libya. You've obviously got Egypt and all the rest of it, right? But I just wanted to show this. But what we do have is the map of a approximate extent of Numidia, Carthaginian, and Roman territory in 150 BC, and this is basically the final Punic War. And the final Punic War is quite short because there's not much of Carthage left. So this is the final Punic War. This is really, really, really short war, 3 years or so. So what we've basically got is this Numidian. Obviously, we don't talk about Numidia. Who are the Numidians? But and Mauritania over by the sort of straits of Tangier and so on. But the point is that you can see how things are developing. The Numidians, wouldn't that be another wonderful lecture? But somebody said to me last night on the Tuesday group, they basically said, I've actually been to a site in Spain where they've got a sign saying this was built by the Carthaginians, and the other sign saying this was built by the Romans. And this is why I want to look a little bit about Carthaginian architecture next week, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. So this is what we're talking about. So the final campaign, the real final campaign, you can see that the Romans want everything. They want the world, right? And the map will eventually all go red, basically. You've all heard that. The British Empire in the 1921, 1922 controlled a quarter of the earth. Like any great empires, the Carthaginians were eventually going to fail. You know, there was an empire which would last 700 years. Adolf Hitler said his empire would last 1,000 years. That didn't happen, did it? No. The Roman Empire, right? If you want to look at the foundation of the Roman world in 753 BC, right? And you take it beyond all the way to 476 AD, the Roman Empire would last over 1,100 years, right? In the West. If the Eastern Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Emperor once said before he went to his death in 1453, he could clearly say that his Roman Empire overall, right? If you want to look at the mathematics in that, lasted over 2,000 years, right? Which is a long empire. But the Chinese could argue that they had their dynasties that lasted a long time as well. So, but anyway, the point with all of this is this is the influence. This is the Roman world, right? And
they're still at it.
Say that again.
The powers are still at it.
The powers are still at it, yeah. And why? So the end of the Third Punic War, as we start to get into more of the nitty gritty, a few battles and all the rest of it. As again, we're still on the introduction. So the Third Punic War, the defense of the city of Carthage. Apparently, Rome would push and push and push and want to capture Carthage, right? The Carthaginians knew that if they lost, they would all be enslaved. The end result in 1476 would be that they would all be burnt to death. 750,000 people were burnt to death in that city, right? It was a Holocaust of unprecedented times. And a day later, you've got the scorched remains of all these hundreds of thousands of people, and Carthage was just left a wasteland. So again, destruction of Carthage, end of Carthaginian territory is what is now Tunisia. So what I'd like to do now is just basically we'll look at these figures and we'll look at these images and a little bit more about Carthaginian, and then we'll look at the Battle of Messina and Mila, right? Because everyone likes a good old battle. So this is basically the end game of the Punic War, the Punic Wars, the Third Punic War. Another Scipio there. This is the third Scipio. This isn't the Scipio that fought against the likes of Hannibal, but this is the last Scipio. So in the year 146 BC, and I'm doing this deliberately to answer one of my critics on YouTube, and you'll know what I mean in a minute. So basically, the other leader, Scipio, fighting against the besieged Carthaginians under the leadership of Hasdrubal and Dionysus. What we've got is that the Roman army could be up to 50,000 strong, right? A big army by any stroke of the imagination. And to give you an idea of the scale of this army, so you're talking about 46,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry. The British army at Waterloo with all of its allies was 72,000 strong. And that was a massive field army that Wellington commanded. So that gives you an idea of the scale of this. So you've got 50,000. And the Carthaginians, an army of 20,000 and some armed civilians. The Romans then got within the walls, didn't go into the city, and just set light to it, killing 750,000 civilians who were mainly burnt to death. So you think about Dresden and the carpet bombing of Dresden in the Second World War. And I think we're talking, I can't remember, I think the casualties are something like 50, 60,000 burnt to death in Dresden. I think that's about right. You can check me on that. You can fact check that. It's debatable. But you're talking about 750,000 people burnt to death, right? And only 50,000 who survived were then enslaved. So people just basically, they didn't want to be enslaved by Rome. They just stayed in the buildings that just died. The firestorm would have been so intense in the city of Carthage that you would have burnt to death before you even knew you were dying, right? The temperatures would have been furnace-like. You're talking about probably the firestorm through the streets of Carthage was in the region of about 1,000 degrees C, which is the temperature required in a kiln to smelt copper, any of those tin and whatever, it's a firestorm, So, and the reason why I wanted to chuck this in here is because there was one of my regulars on YouTube. We've got 10 people on there now. One of my regulars on YouTube basically said, "Oh, you've got a romantic way of looking at Rome, Carl. No, I haven't got a romantic way of looking at Rome. I know how brutal Rome is, and this is blood curdling. This is horrific. This is something on another level, and this is the word Pax Romana. If you surrender to Rome, you can be given freedom. If you fight Rome, your city's going to be burnt to the ground, right? And this would echo down the years. This would echo to Athens. This would echo across the Greek world. So when we get to the likes of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, right, over 100 years later, and it would be like the Egyptians didn't have a standing army. The Egyptians would have been aware that this is the fate if you resist. So back to this. What we're going to do, we're going to look at a few battles. Everyone likes a good old battle, but let's start off with a few other facts. So the clash of the Titans really started the first opening battle of this war with the Carthaginians. That's what Carthage looked like in 323 BC. You know, this is pretty much how big they got. But obviously they did conquer a lot more of Spain in time. And you could say that this is the way there's a few differences between Carthage and Rome if you want to look at this. So they got common languages: Punic, which is Carthaginian; Phoenician, which is basically where Carthage evolved from. You've got Berber, which is a North African language. You've got Numidian, which is North African; Iberian, Spanish. You've got ancient Greece. You've got these languages. But if you're talking about Rome, it's going to be Latin. Forget about your local language. So that's the difference between Rome and the Carthaginians. Punic religion, the Rome has obviously got their own levels of religion, not monotheistic, but obviously lots of gods in Rome. But you've got the Punic religion in regards to the Carthaginians. Government, initially monarchy until the 480s. Then you've got a republic, and then you've got oligarchs. You know, we talk about oligarchs, don't we? You know, like oil magnates. The Carthaginians is more of a trading empire, a bit like the English East India Company when it captured India until the British Crown took over. That's what we're talking about. Here's the date, 814. They've got their own foundation myth. Independence from Tyre, which is modern day Levant, which is the Phoenicians. And there you go, complete wipeout, 146. The height of the Carthaginian Empire in 221 in 221 is just before the Second Punic War of Hannibal. Their population was in excess of 4.3 million. And when you think about it, that's not bad going, considering most of the Carthaginian world is desert. So, thinking about this, Rome would absorb the Carthaginian world. They got their own currency. And this is where we're going next. So the clash came in 264 BC. Messina, Messana. Potato, potato. 264, when Messina the city, appealed for Roman help against Carthage. The Carthaginians wanted to take over the whole of Sicily, and why not? Unusually, the Senate let the assembly decide the issue. So basically, just a little bit of Roman history, right? If you think about those who wrote the American Constitution in the 1870s, including George Washington, they based it on the Roman system of governance, right? So hence why you in America they refer to the Senate, and they refer to the House of Representatives. In other words, the Assembly, right? So the Americans based their system of modern day governance on the Romans. This is why we're using these words now. So the Senate let the Assembly decide the issue, and this is quite early for the sense of democracy. So the Senate Assembly was the assembly of the people. So the Roman people voted for war on the first of 3 Punic Wars, and the Roman name for the Carthaginians. Now, lacking a fleet, Rome decided to build one, copying a captured Carthaginian ship. Can I tell you a little bit of a story? You know, you love my anecdotal stories, all of you, don't you? So the anecdotal story is this. In the early 1950s, I do believe it was, or late 1940s, thereabouts, in the Cold War, the Americans sent a spy plane over Russian airspace, and the Russians shot it down. And when a spy plane hit the ground, it was fairly intact, amazingly enough. It must have hit some snow or something. It hit the ground fairly intact. Anyway, but some of the wings were hanging off, and they thought, oh yeah, we've got to put all this together, right? Well, they put it together, right? And there were holes in it, and there were bolts and various things and whatever. And they reconstructed the whole thing exactly the way it had come down on the ground. But this was a prototype; it wasn't completed, right? And the reason why it come down over Russian airspace in the first place was because it had faults. And when the Russians tried to copy this plane, they copied it with faults and all. The reason why I mention that is that the vessel that was captured by the Romans was a perfect Carthaginian ship. And the trireme that they captured, they were able to copy to the letter. And these vessels were vessels that they used to defeat the Carthaginians in a naval battle. And then it was that naval battle that led to the Roman army relieving Messina, and were able to put a land army into Sicily. So if we think about this and we look at we look at this, and if we look at, hang on, have I got Messina first? Melee. I should do melee first, and then we'll go over the land battle, right? And then we've got to look at the Corvus, right? So this is really important. The one thing about the Romans is that the ship that they had captured, right, is important from the angle that they added something to it, right? They added this, which is known as a Corvus, a raven or a bridge fitted with spikes that crashed down and stuck onto enemy vessels, right? Now, this is really important. The Mediterranean is fairly calm, right? The Romans were used to fighting land battles, and I've got to add something else in here. Like we're the Battle of Melee. So we're chucking this in here, yeah. So this is in 260, right? So the Romans had 4 years to devise their naval fleet. This is a nice reconstruction. The Romans were used to fighting on land, so what they needed to do, they needed to bring their land fighting to sea, right? And by developing this Corvus, this bridge, they were able to link the two ships together and use them as a miniature land battle situation. No word of a lie. And how do I know this? I know this because when we look at the Nemi Lake, and I don't confess to cover this. I'm a great fan of Mussolini in the way he funded archaeology in Italy. He chucked billions of pounds at archaeologists in Italy, and you know, as an archaeologist in Italy, yeah, I would have a really nice house and I'd have loads of money. No, I'll cut that off. But what I want to say is that Napoleon funded the draining of Lake Diana, Nemi Lake, and in that they found two large barges, right? And these were Caligula's barges, and they were probably built roughly in about 38, 39 AD, 38, 39. And Caligula built these to reconstruct the battles out at sea between the Romans and the Carthaginians. So these would be little miniature battle sets on Lake Nemi, and this is what they're there for. So the Romans were obsessed with land battle at sea. And also another little fact, if we want to chuck another little fact in there, do you know the Colosseum could be flooded with water, and you could have little miniature sea battles in the Colosseum, which would then be miniature land battles between the two ships, which will drag together using these corvuses. So this allowed Roman soldiers, not so much Marines, but Roman land fighting soldiers, to board the enemy ship and fight as if on land. With this weapon, a sea battle was won off Myla. Some say it was 260, some say it was 259, whatever. But the war turned against Rome when it sent an army to Africa under Regulus. But we've got to look at Mylae first. So Mylae, as we know, this is Mylae. This is the Straits of Messina. And just think, we got some facts and figures, and this is a poem about this battle, right? And the poem by T.S. Eliot goes as follows. I was trying to really work out the link, and apparently this is what I'm going to do anyway. This is about the battle, burial of the dead out at sea. There I saw one I knew and called him, crying, Stetson, you who were with me in the ships at Mile, that corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? There's a reason for this poem. Will it bloom this year, or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed? Oh, keep the dog far hence, that's friend to man, or with his nails he'll dig it up again. So in other words, this is talking about the Punic Wars. 1 minute fighting, there's a victory here, there's this and that, it's going to keep going until the likes of Carthage is completely destroyed. I don't know if the Romans ever set out in 264 to completely destroy the Carthaginians. Maybe they had a long plan, and this was going to end in 1476. Who knows? It's the Romans. So there's the Corvus. Some of these facts and figures. So we've got a bit of a date problem with the battle 260, 259, somewhere along the line. So remember, it's the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire. If I ever refer to it being an empire at this stage, Rome, I do apologize. It's easy to slip into, but they've got imperial ambitions, not so much the ambitions of a republic. A republic run on the likes of two leaders who were in charge for a year or 2 years, and then they would get somebody else in, and that's the way things were run. And so there'd be never a dictator, Julius Caesar, eat your heart out, who would come along very much later. It would be a Roman victory. And this was another Hannibal, not the Hannibal. Hannibal was a popular name. Hannibal Gisco, who was defeated by Gaius Duilius. Now, this is really, really interesting. This is the Romans doing what they do best. There's always less of them, and there's more of the enemy. Except when there's more Romans, in regards to Spartacus, the Romans usually lose. And when you look at Cannae, which we'll actually try and do before the end today, the Romans had more troops there against Carthage and lost. When the Romans always have less, they usually win. That's the Romans' view. So they had 103 ships versus 130 skilled sailors, Carthaginians. But this is not a naval battle. I'm being very, very dodgy. This is a land battle out at sea, right? This is not a land battle between sailors. This is a land battle between sailors and soldiers, right? Soldiers on the Roman side, sailors. So this was something that the Carthaginians weren't really able to cope with. So one of the things that we really get from this is that we've got 130 Carthaginian vessels. 44 of these ships are captured or sunk, and they lose 10,000 men, mainly sailors, fighting sailors, marines. The Romans had set type legionaries at this stage. 13 ships sunk. Could you imagine? Be a treasure trove there. One of the scepter triremes is captured. 30 quinquetrimaries and triremes are captured. Different sort of categorizations of oared vessels. Out of those 10,000 men, casualties, 7,000 were killed and 3,000 captured. This was a major victory. This was the Romans basically saying, "Look, boys, you've done this thing at sea. Now we can defeat you at sea." So this is probably what got the Carthaginians really, really worried. They were really worried at the stage that now this is like the British Navy being defeated by the Germans in the first. And do you imagine the British Navy being defeated by the Germans at the Battle of Jutland in the First World War? That would have changed the course of the First World War. It would have questioned British dominance at sea. But it was Jutland. Some say the Germans won, some say the British won. Nobody won that one, right? But if the Germans had defeated the British at Jutland, it would have sent a different message. It would have probably ended up with a different outcome to the First World War. This was going to be a different outcome if the Romans were unable to defeat the Carthaginians in something that they were able to do really well. Maybe things would have been very different. So what we've got is that then what we do have is that we've got another battle in the taking. This is the land battle, right? So we've got this big army marching across the land all the way to Agrigentum. And if anyone's been to Agrigentum, they will know that there's beautiful Roman temples there, well worth a visit. All the way over to Syracuse and over to Messina, and the Straits of Messina, or Messina, depending which way you want to say it. And this is a battle. This is a battle. This is a land battle. This is now the this is a few years before Mila, right? There's a few 4 years before, but this is the battle that the Romans had already sent an army over to help the people of Messina. But there you go. And what's happening is, again, the Romans are outnumbered by the Carthaginians yet again. But the Romans are victorious. The Romans got 9,000 soldiers, over 1,300 casualties, and the Carthaginians are used to fighting in Sicily, and they are defeated. 6,000 casualties, half their army is defeated in Sicily. So by what the Romans did in defeating them at Mila 4 years later out at sea, it means that the Romans are going to be dominant at sea, and it means that the Carthaginians are going to be unable to send an army well supplied and stocked over to Sicily to keep Sicily in the domain of Carthage. And this is really, really important. This is like strategies of warfare that actually come all the way down to the Second World War. You know, the usual thing, if the British didn't control the Dover Straits, the Germans would have invaded. The British controlled it, right? The British would controlling the sea. So the Germans were going to control the sky. The Germans didn't control the sky in the Second World War. It was the British, right? So all this is you can see why these lessons are being learned from history way in the past. If you control the sea, then you control the land. And if you're able to fight at sea like a land army, like the Romans did, that really changes things very, very deeply. So Mila, okay, and there's another battle. Now this is really, really interesting. There's another battle. This is in the year 241. This is at the end of the First Punic War, where basically the Carthaginians basically cede the whole of Sicily. This is another sea battle. And there it is, the Agata Islands off the likes of Sicily, on the western side of the army island. And this is one of those other things. A few facts there. The Romans have got 200 vessels. The Carthaginians are putting everything into this, 250 vessels. And look what happens. The Carthaginians at sea are defeated again. Now, it doesn't bode well for the Second Punic War. So what the Carthaginians have got to do, they've got to defeat the Romans on land. Do they do it? Do they manage to get there? So but in amongst all of this, in amongst this time, right? In amongst this time, the Romans have marched a land army into North Africa, right? Basically, they send they send this army into North Africa, which is eventually categorically defeated by the Carthaginians, right, in 255 BC. And this is the point I made, because the Romans were unable to supply the Roman land army via sea, right, because they were harassed by the Carthaginians and the fleet was destroyed in a storm. It meant that the Romans were unable to be victorious on Carthaginian territory. So this is basically this other huge battle. You can imagine, right? 50 vessels from the Carthaginians and 30 vessels by the Romans. There's 80 vessels off the western coast of Sicily that are sunk. 80 vessels underneath the water, right? That's amazing, right? That's like a treasure trove, but it's also It's also a lot of dead people as well. But the thing is, there's another point to be made there when you think about this, how many thousands of people died in that battle with all the vessels, all the 80 vessels that go down and all the ones that were captured and damaged and so on. Because it's something that happens in 241 BC, is it still a war grave? Of course it is. Should we be looking at those vessels and stuff undersea? As archaeologists, maybe not. But could you imagine the information that we get from that? Anyway, moving on. So this again. We know that everything's changed. That's Sicily's gone, and maybe what we should do. It's 8:13, and so what we'll do. So I'll end this first bit, and we'll go over to Hannibal and his elephants, and going over the Alps and all the rest of it. So basically, what happened? So here we go. Carthage was forced to abandon Sicily because you couldn't get an army over there anymore. Couldn't supply an army. This became the first proper Roman province, an imperial possession. You can't call it an imperial possession when it's a republic, but that's what one book says. The great city of Syracuse was still in Greek hands, but it would eventually fall. This became Rome's first pliant kingdom or protectorate. Rome had won by adaptability, and was able to replace those men that they had lost, but Carthage didn't. And then that leads us all the way to the year 218, and that's what we'll start off with after the break. But there is Hannibal himself, Hannibal, the great general. And we've got a few facts and figures there, and he just basically went into obscurity after the defeat at Zama, where he lost a lot of Carthaginian territory. But that's life. But Carthage was lucky to survive. Okay, so let's sort of see if there are any questions. Stop share. And folks, if you've got anything you'd like to say. Anne.
So, where did he end up, Hannibal? Did he go back to Carthage? Did he go back somewhere?
Yeah, we'll talk about that after the break.
Oh, right.
And anyone watching online, YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you've got any comments, please put them on. Anne's available for bar mitzvahs and funerals. Oh, did I tell you about that story once, right? I haven't told this story in ages, right? I had this weird phone call once from somebody. They said, oh, look, we've got a person. They didn't give any details, right? We've got a person that wants to talk, right? At like a church hall, right? And they said they want you to talk about a really interesting subject. So I thought, right, I sat down and I thought, really interesting subject, cremations, right? Burials, right? I thought that would be absolutely great. Yeah. So I wasn't told that the person who wanted the lecture was actually dead, right? It was actually awake, right? So I've got all these images, right? And everyone's in these black suits. And I think it's like a men's forum group or something, right? So I'm talking, I'm saying, look at these cremational urns. And I'm going on really enthusiastically, and I'm talking about burials and decomposition of bodies and all the rest of it, right? And nobody had a straight face on there for the whole hour, right? And at the end, right, nobody clapped. And I thought, oh my God, I bombed this one, right? And the person organizing this gave me an envelope, and they said, well, we wish we would have told you that this was a wake for the man who's just been buried today. But this is a lecture he would have wanted. So, yeah, at least I got paid for it. And at least I was entertaining. And at least the guy who died wanted a lecture on something interesting in archaeology. I thought I'd put that in there. And that leads me directly into another thing. I mentioned last week that when they were excavating in Carthage, they found big vats of honey, right? As you know, honey can last thousands and thousands of years. They even found honey in a little jar buried with Tutankhamun. So that's 3,500 years old. That's great. They found these massive jars full of honey, and the archaeologists excavating there thought, oh, this is a bit cloudy, this honey, as it usually is. And the archaeologists were tasting this honey. And there was one archaeologist who was taking some of the scoops of this honey out and putting it on his bread in the morning, right? Anyway, they then found out that the honey was basically used to preserve babies' bodies in these large jars. Basically, what the honey would do, it would absorb and it would sort of break down the tissues of the body, and then it would go into the rest of the honey. So, in other words, what they were eating that a day in the morning on toast was the residual remains of little babies that had been placed in these jars over 2,000 years ago.
So sugar can eat things.
But nothing. You can't get bacteria and stuff in. Yeah. So exactly.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So sugar can break down things, but obviously it lasts a long time. So anyway, anything you'd like to say, Goff?
No, I've got a comment about. You didn't watch Gladiator 2, did you?
I haven't seen it. And
Well,
the next film I'm going to see is going to be 28 years later.
There's a scene in there where they reenact the sea battle in the Colosseum.
Oh, lush!
That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So you were right.
Yeah, it's there's lots of what that when the reason why I'm doing this, Goff, I'm not defending myself. I'm just saying the reason why I'm doing this is that to understand why they're doing these battles in the Colosseum and why there's Lake Nemi and Caligula is all based on their history. And then when you start to understand their history, you understand how the Romans think.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for that, Goff. I'm glad you mentioned that about Gladiator 2. Yeah, it's just I really want to see that film. Probably still can see it, but I'm gonna save my pennies to see 28 years later. Michelle won't go with me because she don't like the blood and gore. So there you go. I got a massive tub of popcorn, right, all to myself on that one. I still got to take the dustpan and brush. They know what they do in the cinema now, right? They bring me a dustpan and brush to sweep it all up and take it home to the chickens. They know. Right. Okay, then. Don't come to the cinema with me. It's not a good idea. Richard.
Well, be interesting.
Okay, Henry's coming to the cinema with me the day after. Henry?
I don't think so.
Anything you want to say?
No, that was very good. Shows how violent times were back then. Maybe things haven't changed much.
I gotta be honest with you on that point. There was something that I wanted to say earlier on that will humanity ever change? Because actually before we go on a break, I think there was a point that we made last night that we actually discussed a little bit. And I'm going to say it now that there are two schools of thought about this very subject that you've mentioned, Henry, and this leads me into this, that I would argue that that technical innovations only occur in peace times. But somebody might argue that I'm wrong there, and I'll give you two examples of one side of this. I keep on hearing historians, there's something I would say as well, that if the First World War hadn't have happened, right, we'd already invented planes, the Wright brothers, 1906, we already had vehicles, we had all the technical innovations that led to us having the technology to fight the First World War, right? If the First World War had never happened, where would we have gone from there? There would have been all those intelligent boys and girls who had died in the trenches, would have been out there developing the science and all the technological innovations. We didn't need Telford's Bridge wasn't built in a time of warfare, right? It was built in a time of peace. So, well, relative peace in Britain. So I could argue that in peace times, humanity can really evolve. However, somebody could come back at me and they could say, you look at the Second World War, Carl, you're completely wrong. We would not have had nuclear weapons. We would not have had jet fighters. We would have not had V1 rockets being able to go to the moon. We would never have none of this technology, right? But then again, I could then argue that, you know, the Hurricane and the Spitfire was being developed before the Second World War. I could argue that the Germans were already on jet propulsion before the advent of the Second World War. And there's talk of 1938, something to do with nuclear atomic research. So do we need warfare to develop humanity into another stage? And I say no. I say that we could have done without all of this warfare. And just think of the Antikythera mechanism, right? We've done that, found in the beginning of the 1900s, from the island of Antikythera. That was developed in a time of peace, right? But it was lost in a time of something else. If there wasn't that level of warfare, could we have seen the Antikythera mechanism develop into a computer, as computers eventually developed from the likes of the Enigma machine and the decoding and Bletchley Park and all the rest of it? So questions to be asked there, but no answers. What we're going to do, we're going to take a break. It's 8:24. Pat's not with us this weekend because you upset her, but she'll be over it in 2 weeks and she'll be back. So we'll take a break now.
Okay.
I got to put Baldrick to bed.
Okay.
And basically, we got the dodgy git online. He says hello to you, Anne. He's talking about Howard Crowhurst again, and he's talking about the fact that he wants to take Richard out on a date. So Richard, I wouldn't go for that one. Yeah. So we're having a break. We'll be back at 8:36ish. So go on in, put your kettles on.
All right. I've been to Norfolk. There we
What
are.
what have you been there for?
To see the Norfolk.
Oh, I went to a brothel, but I'm not talking about. Oh, guess who I met? Guess who I met on Monday for the second time?
Oh,
Well, I was on set. Somebody worked it out straight away. I bumped into my friend. Go on. This is only the second time I've ever met him. Guess.
Wolf Hall.
No, I can't say the production I was on yesterday, but I was in the village of the town of Caution.
They're the tenants.
Yes, you got it again. My God! Right, I'm gonna have a break.
I'm all right. I'll talk to you after. I got something to say.
All right, then. Don't forget.
I can't get up.
Not time. Baldrick. Oh, mate, look at my hair. Doesn't that look good? I haven't washed my hair since Monday. It's shocking, isn't it? Oh, it's absolutely shocking. Oh, you bitch. Shut your face. Do you know, the problem is with French brothels, right, is that you don't know what to do. Oh, matron. Oh, you. My phone is so hot. It's just like putting a vat of cold air. Oh. The sheep. Sister, it's amazing that I have a break and we've got 14 people online. 14. And I don't know why people come online so late. Okay, there. So we can do live. Gosh, you right. Full edit. People online who are watching this online on YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Every subscriber is valued, and you get updates. And anyone who wants to join the channel, £1.99 a month, join.
All right. Oh, it's all right. I just see it. I don't know where he's got me.
Sorry.
It's all right. You're going. No, I don't know where I am. I can never see myself, so I don't know.
Oh, you're at the top of mine.
Oh, I don't know why he's blocked mine. He's blocked mine. Are you all right?
Yeah, fine.
You went off somewhere? Was it the weekend or?
No, it's been Barry.
Oh, I've been bad. I have. I went to we went to Norfolk, went to Norwich, and
Oh, yeah.
stayed 4 nights, and went to different places, like the railway track, the railway preservation train ride to somewhere. I can't remember what it was now. Oh, anyway, yeah, and then we went to Cromer, where they got crabs.
Yeah.
I got crabs.
You what? Cromer crabs.
I've got crabs.
And then we went the next day. We went on the Broads, and well, I mean, it was some of the Broads. It wasn't all the Broads.
Yeah.
Just sort of a boat trip, and it's quite nice. And it's very, very flat. It's not like Lincolnshire where there's a lot more. You've got the wolds and drainage ditches. They don't seem to have a lot of drainage in Norfolk.
Well, it's just the Broads, isn't it?
It's
Not
all,
long years ago, I went there.
yeah, you went, did you?
Yeah, about 60
Yeah,
years
but
ago.
they reckon that they were gravel pits.
Yeah, and Pete.
Don't
Digging
know what
Pete.
about- Oh, it's not like Lincolnshire then, the Fenlands, but it's flat. Nice weather.
Yeah.
The hotel was okay. Holiday Inn, food was okay.
Yeah.
But I got a bug, so I was poorly on the way back, and I managed to get back anyway.
The main thing.
And I'm feeling better now, though.
Have you seen a bandicoot?
Pardon?
Have you seen my pet bandicoot?
Your bandicoot?
No, my bandicoot.
Oh, bandicoot.
No, bandicoot.
No,
You have it. Oh, right. I'll have to bring him. I've got a pet bandicoot.
is that the one with the white?
Yes, that's the one. You-
White beak.
I thought you'd seen the bandicoot.
I've heard of that. A bandicoot is something in Australia.
No, it's a bandicoot. A coot. It's a coot bird.
Bandicoot. Oh, right.
It's a bandicoot.
Where did it come from?
It's a British bird.
I know, but where did it come from? It just walked into your garden.
Oh no, he had the problem with his wing. I'm just waiting for my cup of tea a minute, boys and girls.
Yeah, me. I
It's nearly
can't
done.
drink coffee today.
What's that?
I can't drink coffee today.
Oh right, yeah. What didn't you?
You know what coffee does to you?
Oh yeah, it makes me very amorous. I got,
Yeah, there was nothing much because we went with you know.
oh, hang on a minute, Anne, I've got something to ask you. Are you going to come along to our ghost walk at Cowbridge?
When's that?
Not this Saturday, but the following Saturday.
In the evening, is it?
Yeah, 7 o'clock. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Probably not.
What?
What about this thing we were going to do at the
Oh yeah, is that the thing you were going to talk about?
No,
Hang on a minute. I'll just get my
Oh,
tea.
I can't remember.
Hang
that's
on.
later.
I'm just pouring my tea. Right. So what? The thing over Cowbridge?
Yeah, I was wondering, you know, I don't really want to go this week.
No. All right then. We'll do it another week then.
It's just, you want to go to this place on Saturday, the 21st?
No. It's the 20. It's the 28th. This next Saturday.
Yeah, without me, we'll be going on the Thursday, the 20 something, and then the 28th.
Where are you going?
No, you're going to do a ghost walk.
No, I'm doing a ghost walk on the 28th. I'm not doing any other day. So sometimes I think I've lost the will to live.
Perhaps wait till after. Perhaps wait till August.
Yeah, and what was it you wanted to ask me?
Oh, hell. I can't remember now.
Oh, but well, I don't see what the point is some days.
No, me.
I've lost the will to live.
Oh, dear.
All right then. Anyway, I'm just gonna have this a minute. I had an earwig in my sandwich earlier on.
Is it? Oh,
Mhm.
well. You know, they gotta live, haven't they?
Not when you're eating them.
Was it an eerie wig or a...
It was an earwig. Right. Let's crack on.
All right. All right. I gotta go and pour my tea.
Oh, for God's sake. Oh, we're cracking on, guys. I tell you what, you can't get the staff these days, honestly. You really can't. Do you ever have those messages on your phone saying, "Oh, if you give me your bank details, then I'll give you 5,000 quid." And I said, oh, thanks for the money. Like I said, they haven't even sent it. They said, and they said, oh, what are you going to spend the £5,000 on? I said, oh, I'll spend it at night at the Ritz with a prostitute. And I said, you can't do that. I said, I can do whatever I like with the money. I said. Anyway, are you seeing Hannibal on the screen?
Yeah.
Good. Right, okay then. So basically what this is, we're now into the nitty-gritty of the Second Punic War, which is basically Hannibal, the 17-year war that was from 218 to 201 BC. And when you think about it, you see this as being the archetypal war between the Romans and the Carthaginians, and this great person Hannibal, which so many people have come across. But do we understand who he was? We know that he had this massive victory against the Romans at Lake Trasimene. Basically, this war of attrition. So basically, between 241, which was the end of the First Punic War, and 218, there were lots of things going on. And what those things going on was that there was a revolt by the unpaid mercenaries who worked for the Carthaginians on the island of Sardinia and Corsica. And basically what happened was that the mercenaries wrote to the Romans and said, look, we haven't been paid by the Carthaginians. And the Romans said, we'll pay you. And then basically Corsica and Sardinia just went straight over to the Romans without any fighting. Now, when the other thing, what is also happening before Hannibal is on the stage of history. His dad, Hamilcar Barca, 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 is the dad of Hannibal, and he conquers a big chunk of the modern day area of the Iberian Peninsula. And the one difference is that Hannibal's dad, Hamilcar, is able to get access to Spain's silver mines. So in other words, this means that they can actually pay their army. So this is great. Hannibal took direct command, direct command of the armies of Carthage in the year 221 BC. Nothing happened for 3 years. Nothing happened at all for 3 years until the war started in 218 BC, the Second Punic War. And Hannibal built up his army. But he was determined to strike directly at Italy, the source of Rome's vast military manpower, and wanted to exact revenge for the loss of Sicily. So Hannibal was born in 247. So we got to count back with this. So he took command of the army of Carthage in 221. So he was a lass, 25, 26 years old when he took command of his father's army. And there he is. He dies way after he dies about 20 years after the Second Punic War, in obscurity at roughly the age of 64, 66. We don't really know. But anyway, so he ends up leaving the Carthaginian world and fights for the Seleucid Empire and the Kingdom of Bithynia. So he basically leaves the old world of Carthage and everything that's associated. So commander-in-chief of the Carthaginian army, involved in a number of different wars. He is married. He has a son, we do believe, known as Haspar, and he's also a bit of a politician. Now, this is the battle that he's known for, the Battle of Cannae. And this is shown by the artist John the Troubadour, the death of Paulus Amilius at the Battle of Cannae, the Roman general. Now, there's something really interesting about this. In this illustration, they've probably got the Roman armor correct. They're probably interpreting the armor and the shields. This is probably quite an accurate scene, actually. But the eagle from the Roman legions left isn't probably accurate, but nice little bit of a scene, Battle of Cannae. So Hannibal took command of the army, as we know, in 221 BC, determined to strike directly at Italy. In 218, Hannibal marched his army from Spain, including 37 elephants, truckload of statues of Lloyd George, over the Alps into a snowstorm. Hannibal's skills combined with Roman amateurishness led to a series of Carthaginian victories, leaving Rome almost defenseless after the third annihilation defeat at Cannae in 216 BC. Now, this is where he really comes into history. So what we got to do, there's a map coming up. Where's this map? Oh, yes, there's the map. So if we look at the map first and we do some facts and figures. So this is the northern part of the Carthaginian world that they control, from Saguntum all the way over through past the river Elbro, over the Pyrenees, Marseille, Massilia, that's where we go, over the Rhone, and then over the Alps, so past Turin, all the way down past the River Po, and then he's marching into Italy. So there's Cannae, and he's wandering around Italy, defeating any Roman armies. Capua now, that's really interesting. So when we look, for example, at Capua is the location, if you remember from last week, that the rebellion of Spartacus started in the year 74 BC. So this is almost fortuitous for the future of what's going to happen. So what I'm going to do is, I do believe if I go through this, we've got another map a bit much further back with all of this. Sorry to go through all this. This is different technology tonight, and I don't want to mess this up. Hang on. Oh, hang on, we can do that. Excellent. So if we go, yeah, that's where we're going to go there. We're going to zoom in here. Nice. So what you've got, the Battle of Cannae in 216, and you've got you've got a victory here at Trebia, where they defeat the Romans at Trebia. And if you notice the year 218, 217, this is not in a year, this is over years, right? So another victory there at around Seneca Gallica in 217, and they've got the Cannae there. Another victory at Nola in 215, and eventually this army of Hannibal leaves Italy at Croton, and then you've got 202 Zama. So in other words, there's a big time gap between the Romans getting into North Africa, right, to get to Zama to eventually defeat Hannibal. So this is going over a long period of time. This is going over years. This is not this is the Spartacus rebellion that was done and over in 3 years. But when you've got this, you've got difference between the Hannibal victory at Trebia, and then you've got Sena Gallica, Cannae, all the way to Nola 215, and you've got 3 years of conquest of Italy. But Hannibal did not capture Rome. If he had captured Rome, history would have been a different story altogether. So what we got to do is, if I go to my chart and I try to find out where I was, there we go. We go back on that one, and a few more facts and figures. Let's do some really interesting things in regards to Cannae. So the Carthaginian forces gain a foothold in southern Italy. Defection of some Roman allies, including Capua, to Carthage. Capua, Taranto, Syracuse does actually side at this stage with Carthage, and Hannibal just could not capture Rome. He was unable to capture Rome itself, although he rode around its walls, which is not good enough, really, just riding around the walls of Rome. But he was unable to capture it. Now these elephants, let's bring in the elephant image, which we had earlier on. Let's bring that one in. So where's our elephant? Did we have an elephant earlier on? I thought sure we did. I'm sure we had an elephant. Where's my elephant? There he is. There's my elephant. Right. Now, there's my elephant. Yes. Now, I'm looking at this and thinking, right, great elephant. He had 37 elephants, but eventually the Romans were able to defeat the elephant in North Africa. And it's said this type of elephant is not the normal African elephant. This is the North African elephant. This is not the South Rhodesian African elephant. It's got smaller ears. It's smaller and squatter. Now, this type of elephant is probably a similar size to the elephants that Alexander the Great came across with his campaign all the way across to the Indus Valley people. One comparison I made last night with Alexander the Great So we're talking about Alexander the Great in the 330s into the 320s. Alexander the Great's campaign was just about a decade, right? So, but we're talking about Hannibal, this campaign, 17 years. Now, we think about, Alexander the Great is away from home for a real long time. But Hannibal's away from home with his march over the Pyrenees and the Alps for, a good 4 years or so. So, this is a long campaign. This is the equivalent of the length of the American Civil War, and you're thinking, well, this isn't a short period of time. But for us to look at it in history, it's just a few numbers on the board. So a battle elephant, were they effective in battle? Well, initially they were effective in battle because the Romans never ever seen them before. But eventually, when they were using them in battle in North Africa, the Romans were able to defeat the battle elephants, the tanks of the day, quite easily. The equivalent is to be made when you look at the First World War. So when you look at the introduction of the tank by the Mark I tank in the First World War against the Germans are shocked. They just freeze on the battlefield. They don't know what to do, right? And the first battle that tanks are used, and the battle name is in my head, but I just cannot remember which one. So when the Allies used the tank in the First World War, the Germans just stand there shocked. They don't know what to do. So in other words, the Allies make advances. If one of you can look this up on your phone and tell me which battle it was and which month and which year, I think it was 1916. So the Allies use the tank, but eventually the Germans are able to adapt to the tank, and the tank is basically useless in the First World War. It clogs up. The Germans are able to deal with the tank, but initially they're not. And this is by learning how to deal with the tank in the First World War. The Romans are not able to deal with these elephants on the Italian peninsula, but then they're able to deal with the elephants. The best thing to do with the elephants is to scare them, is to charge cavalry at them, and the elephants just turn around and then trample on Carthaginian soldiers. But the Romans don't do this initially. They don't do this in the fighting in Italy itself. So if we go back to where we were, get to some of my facts and figures, and this is where we're going to go back to the Battle of Cannae. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something. I'm going to move away from Cannae for a minute, right? And then we're going to do the Battle of Cannae. So the way I'm going to move away is I'm going to basically say that there's this victory and Battle of Cannae. And what we're looking at is Hannibal's unable to capture Rome. With cool courage, the Senate then sent an army to Spain to strike at Hannibal's. But hang on a minute, it's a bloody sheep. Hang on. Stop it! Come on! Sorry, that was a sheep. It was rubbing its back against the railings underneath. Sorry, guys. Where were we? So basically, Hannibal was unable to capture Rome. So this is one of the things with all of this. He's unable to capture Rome, and it's frustrating for him. So with cool courage, the Senate then sent an army to Spain to strike at Hannibal's base. After some initial defeats, Cornelius Scipio landed in 210 and in 206 ousted the Carthaginians, basically out of Spain and out of Italy. Back to Spain itself, we're moving back into the campaign. So this amazing victory, which we're going to talk about in a few moments, of Cannae, right? This amazing victory didn't mean that Carthage would be the great victor in this war. So Rome would then possess Spain after 206. This is coming to the end of the Second Punic War in 201. Meanwhile, in Italy, the Romans had adopted the scorched earth policy. Under Fabius the delayer. This denied Hannibal all resources, but also devastated Italian farms and caused massive homelessness. So in other words, what the Romans did, they just decided to set light to the countryside. Now, again, what I'm going to do, I could do a bit of a comparison with the American Civil War. Again, I've already done this. I did this last week with when generals were learning their fighting ability and how to command troops, they were looking at Spartacus's campaign in 74 to 71 BC. But they were also looking at this amazing campaign, this fight between Scipio and Hannibal. And this is one thing that was probably in the mind of the likes of Sherman on his march from Atlanta to the sea, all the way through to Confederate territory. Now, this thing, scorched earth policy, was basically what you do as you're marching forward. You get as much of the supplies as you can and you burn the rest, right? You keep marching forward, you burn it. It's called scorched earth. So the enemy behind you is unable to supply their troops, and they're slowly running out of supplies. This is what Sherman did in his march to the sea after Atlanta. Yeah, Atlanta is the one portrayed in Gone with the Wind. And then with Clark Gable, this denied Hannibal all resources. And the war of attrition ended at, you can see on the map, Zama, at the Battle of Zama, in the year 204. Scipio basically defeated Hannibal. No, Battle of Zama was 202 actually. Scipio defeated Hannibal, and what then happened was that Carthaginian troops had to leave everywhere other than North Africa, and it led to the defeat, finally, of Hannibal and the Carthaginians at Zama in 202, and a peace treaty signed at 201 after 17 years. But what we were going to do, we're going to end on a high. We're going to end on a high with looking at the Battle of Cannae, to give a sense of glory for the likes of our wonderful general Hannibal. The 2nd of August 216 BC, and what we've got these generals here, and this is something Scipio is going to definitely learn from. So the Romans are losing Paulus Servilius Geminus, and we've got Lucius Aemilius, who's actually portrayed. This is Paulus Aemilius, who's obviously related to the other general, and that's his death in battle, the Battle of Cannae, illustrated by John Trumbull in 1773. So Hannibal's there with his generals, Hasdrubal, relative, and you've got a wonderful set of generals there. And this really speaks something amazing. These figures speak amazing. Before we do that, right, this is written, all of these facts and figures are actually written down by Roman historians. And by the way, I didn't say it at the beginning tonight. We're going to do a presentation, not next week, but the following week, looking at Roman writers. Because one of the things that we're going to be one of the big problems that I've got is Roman writers. In a sense, I'm talking about Roman writers. I'm basically saying the Roman writer Plutarch, the Roman writer Tacitus, Cassius, Polybus, Livy, Ptolemy, Appian, Pliny 1, Pliny 2, Tacitus 2. And who are these people, right? You got Livy there. And Polybus there. Who are these people? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a whole presentation looking at these writers and who they are, so that when I mention Tacitus, you can say, which is it, Tacitus first or the second one? And Julius Caesar, he was also a writer as well. You know all about Julius Caesar. But I want to do a presentation looking at that, so we know who these people are. And lots of these writers are actually Greek. Or why are they Greek? But anyway, let's do the real facts and figures. You can see the facts and figures there. The battle stats are written about by the Romans. This is so disastrous for the Romans. So here we go. This is quite, now these are the facts and figures written down by the Romans, right? if the Romans wanted to say, if Roman historians wanted to say, actually, Carthage had 50,000 men and we only had 10,000 men, it was a done deal, we were going to lose. But no, the Roman historians were basically saying, look, we had 86,000 men at the Battle of Cannae. Yeah, 86,000. Now, to give you an idea of how many men 86,000 is, right? That's around the figure of the entire army, the British army that surrendered to Singapore, right? That is, I think it's about 88,000, something like that. But that gives you an idea of the number of Roman soldiers on the field that day at Cannae. The other thing as well, 86,000, that is the entire strength of Napoleon's army at Waterloo, 72,000, plus another 14,000. If Napoleon had another 14,000 men at Waterloo, it would have been a done deal, right? So this is a massive Roman army. This is probably most of the Roman army, other than the army of Scipio, right? This is most of the Roman army. It's basically, this is Scipio's armies being defeated, right? He may not have been clearly at the battle, but this is something that Scipio needed to rectify. So 15,000 light infantry, 55,000 infantry, Roman and allies. This is basically whatever Scipio had left was what there was left, right? This is what was on the field, commanded by the other generals. So 6,400 cavalry, which was very important. 2,400 Roman cavalry and 4,000 allied cavalry and 10,000 allied garrisons. So lots of these are non-Roman, right? And the Romans could have argued, like Hitler argued at Stalingrad, it was the Romanians and the Hungarians and the Italians that lost me Stalingrad, right? No, you can't do that. This is a Roman defeat, right? This is a clear Roman defeat, right? It's argued at Isandlwana in January 1879 that the British army lost at Isandlwana because of all the native army that we had with us. No, the British army lost that battle, right? So the Roman historians are saying that the Romans clearly lost this battle, right? This is their strength, nearly 86,500. Hannibal's army was the last 50,000. It was outnumbered. This is probably there's a parallel to be made with this, right, in the American Civil War again. Sorry to make that parallel, right? The biggest army that the Confederacy marched into Northern Territory in the American Civil War in 1863 was at Gettysburg, right? It was in excess of 100,000 men on the Confederate side. It was the biggest army that the Confederacy would ever command, right? It lost at Gettysburg, right? Most other battles, the Confederacy were outnumbered and they won, right? This is exactly the same thing. When the Romans have too many men on the battlefield, they usually get defeated. We see that with Spartacus. So there we go, 50,000 on the side of Hannibal, Carthaginians, 8,000 light infantry. It's a lot less, isn't it? Balearic slingers, skirmishers as well. 32,000 infantry. Gauls, that's key. The Gauls absolutely, my friends, bloody hate the Romans. They've got a bloodlust against the Romans. Get the Gauls involved. Hispanics. So we got some from Spain. We got Libyans, the Carthaginians themselves. At this stage as well, they've also got the support of the Numidians. And you've got also Spanish cavalry and you've got Gallic cavalry. So a force of 10,000 cavalry, right? Which outnumbers the Romans, not 2-1, but does outnumber the Romans, right? So this is key. And you've got the 37 elephants. Now, I'm not really sure at this stage how many elephants had survived. How many elephants had survived, I don't know. We had nearly 20 people on YouTube then as well. So anyway, welcome everybody on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So basically what then happens, right, is this. And we'll look at some battlefield maps as well. And we'll just have a little look at that before we finish tonight, because I like battlefield maps. Everyone likes a good old map. So what we've got here is that one Roman historian is saying, one Polybus is saying that 80,000 Roman soldiers are either killed or captured in the battle, which is basically the entire army. That's a Roman historian saying that. It must be accurate, because Livy, the other Roman historian, is saying something similar. 48,000 Romans killed on the battlefield, nearly 19,500 Roman soldiers captured. Look at the shame of that. And 14,000 Roman soldiers ran away. A Roman writer saying that? 14,000, a Roman army group running away? What's all that about? And then the Roman writers are also saying that the casualties were a fifth of the force for the Carthaginians, which is still substantial. They said loss that Hannibal couldn't absorb, but it worked out. And there we've got Livy saying 8,000 were killed, Polybus saying 5,700 killed. Right, the figures are 8,000. So in other words, out of 50,000, this is what's going on. So this is absolutely disastrous for Rome, and Rome will remember this, and they will never be in this situation again. They will learn. Scipio learns from this. He learns from his other generals' defeat, and he will then take what he's learned from this, the remaining army of Rome, and he would then get this army to Zama, and he would kick Hannibal off the ballpark forever, and the Carthaginians in 202 BC. But we still got the other Punic War. So there we go. We got the Battle of Cannae there. We're just going to look at some battle maps. We love battle maps. There we go. Again, we've seen this a number of times. Hannibal's wandering around Italy, making friends, as we've said. Taranto as well. And we've got the likes of Syracuse on Sicily, friends. And look at this. We're loving this. These are basically... these are battle plans, right? And we'll do all these little battle plans. I love battle plans. So we've got the victory that the guess which color are the Carthaginians? They're blue, right? And what we've got, Trebia, we've got more images than this. The boxes with the cross in the cavalry, and the solid boxes are the infantry. And you can see what's going on there. They're outplaying the Roman army. They're using their cavalry. Now, this is one thing that the cavalry, the Romans weren't brilliant with their cavalry. They weren't brilliant sailors either. So they were able to put their land army on the vessels, and we've explained that. But the Romans weren't great cavalry, and they learned to use their cavalry properly after Cannae, in 216. So what we've got there, I think we've got the charts there, and we can look at this. Hang on a minute. Yes, we've got the charts here. We've got one there. Okay, we can go with Battle of Cannae. There we go. We'll go with the Battle of Cannae, and we'll explain that one. And we've got a few little things. So there we go. Trebia 218, probably more elephants present. The cavalry, there we go. If you can see the cavalry, the blue boxes with the line, they defeat the Roman cavalry, and they're at the back of the Roman cavalry, and then they wipe out the infantry. Easy, right? So the Romans should have learned from that at Tresime, which is Lake Tresime, which is obviously, we introduced that earlier on as Battle of Cannae. It wasn't Lake Tresime, was a different battle in 217. This was the one that the Roman army was pushed into the lake and drowned, right? So in other words, the cavalry pushed the Roman infantry in the lake in 217, and there is Cannae. So we're going to look at this. We're going to have a nice little look, and we'll finish probably in about 10 minutes. So the Senate determined to bring 8 legions into the field, 86,000 men plus, which had never been done at Rome before. Each legion consisted of 5,000 men besides allies, auxiliaries. Most of their wars are decided by one consul and 2 legions with their quota of allies, and they rarely employ all 4 at one time and on one service. But on this occasion, so great was the alarm and terror of what would happen, they resolved to bring not only 4 but 8 legions into the field. Polybus, the histories of Polybus. Now, this is a really interesting point. The Romans did not want all their armies in one spot at any one time. when the Roman Empire was at its height in roughly the 140s, 150s, under the likes of Antonius Pius and then Marcus Aurelius, there was 25 legions across the empire, and they were all spread out. So the fear was, if you had a big number of legions in any one spot at any one time, and you wanted to march on Rome and become the emperor, think about all those things. It all starts now. So a modern monument near the site of the Battle of Cannae, a modern interpretation of a slinger from the Balearic Islands, famous for the skill of their slingers. Basically, a slinger is, you've got a pile of stones which you're going to carry with you, a sling. These would be swung. You've seen them in all the movies, right? They would be to sort of knock people off their stead as they're fighting. If you get a stone in the eye, it's going to blind you. You're going to be in agony on the floor. If something like this hits the muscle in your arm, you're going to drop your sword or your shield. And this is the Battle of Cannae, right? So the initial deployment and Roman attack in red. So there we go. It's quite easy. It's a big Roman force. The Romans are going to win this. There's no way that Rome is going to lose this battle, right? But Rome does lose the battle. And interesting enough, the likes of the Roman camp and the likes of Hannibal's camp are basically on the opposite side of the river, which is quite unusual. So you can clearly see that the Romans are marching towards the right of the screen, right? And you can clearly see something very, very interesting, that the center army, the center wing of Hannibal's army, right, is actually retreating. However, this is to distract the main Roman army, because what happens, the Spanish and Gaulish cavalry attack whatever Roman cavalry is deployed at the bottom part of the screen, which it basically is a big distraction. And interestingly enough, this is very similar to what the Duke of Normandy did on the 14th of October in 1066. So basically what the Normans would do, right? They would head towards Harold's lines, and then they would head towards Harold's lines and retreat. Hopefully Harold's army would then follow, and they did, right? And then they sent in the cavalry, and that's exactly what happened at the Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October in 1066. And then what you've got the Numidian cavalry holding the top part of the wing, holding off the allied cavalry, right? Remember the cavalry on the side of the likes of Hannibal is 10,000, and the Roman cavalry is just over 6,000, so they've got an advantage. Cavalry is what's used in the field. Wherever the elephants are, maybe they're deployed somewhere on here. But now, this is the Battle of Cannae as it's truncated. So what Hannibal has done, he's drawn the Roman army into his center, not protecting his wings, and then what happens is that the cavalry, right, the cavalry of the Hannibal is actually chasing the Roman cavalry off the field, right? And interestingly enough, I'm gonna get the battle wrong here, but Prince Rupert did the same, I think, at the Battle of Naseby on Marston Moor, did exactly the same thing. So he chased the parliamentary cavalry off the field, right? And then this was all planned. And then basically, as he's looting the baggage trains, all the cavalry's off the field, but the infantry of the parliamentary forces is then able to defeat the king because of Rupert. But in this occasion, it works really well. Hannibal uses all his cavalry and pushes the Roman cavalry off the field. So it's then able that the forces of Hannibal are able to surround the army of the Romans and are able to defeat the Romans categorically on the field. The Romans are being hit on all sides. So the Romans are really learning from this. They're really learning from this huge defeat. And this is why Polybus and Livy are saying, look, we were defeated. We've got to learn from this. And what we're going to do is we're going to, this is what we're going to do next week. But Philip V of Macedon pledged his support to Hannibal following the Carthaginian victory. And remember, interestingly enough, this is a timeline that we haven't mentioned. This is in 216. Alexander the Great has come and gone. Alexander the Great is in the 330s, 320s, right? This is quick mathematics, 100 years earlier, right? So this is interesting. So Philip V, who was an ancestor of Alexander the Great, right, we basically said, well, let's give the support to Hannibal. But what we're going to do, we're going to read this out. This is Livy writing about this battle. And we'll close on this. Never, when the city was in safety, was there so great a panic and confusion within the walls of Rome. I shall therefore shrink from the task and not attempt to relate what in describing I must make less than the reality. The consul in his army having been lost at Trisemos the year before, that other battle, the army was pushed into the water. It was not one wound upon another which was announced, but a multiplied disaster, the loss of 2 consular armies. We mentioned the consular armies when we talk about Spartacus decades later, together with the 2 consuls, and that now there was neither any Roman camp, nor general, nor soldiery, that Apula and Saminum, and now almost the whole of Italy were in the possession of Hannibal. No other nation, surely, would not have been overwhelmed by such an accumulation of misfortune. But the Romans weren't totally overwhelmed. They were able to fight back, and they were able to defeat the army of Carthage, which we're going to do next week. We're also going to do a bit of Carthaginian architecture. We're going to look at the links and sort of try to sort of go to the Battle of Zama and try to work all that stuff out. And also next week we're going to be going around the Roman world and looking at some architecture, if I can put that in. So that's me done for today. It's 9:23, and that's I think a good end. Thanks to Livy. We need to understand these historians. So let's see if there's any questions tonight. Let's see if there's any questions from Richard.
No, nothing from me.
Every lad likes a good old battle, don't we, Richard?
Oh,
I used to play with my soldiers all the time. Henry, did you used to play with the soldiers?
I know my son does. He's kept all of them. They're actually all under the bed.
Oh, right. He's a war gamer, is he? Oh,
Yep.
don't. What type of? Hang on. This is a man-to-man thing. What type of war games does he do? Does this American Civil War, Napoleonic? What?
He does knights, but also he does Warhammer.
Ah, my God! And it's something you can't. He won't grow out of that. That's it. It's there forever. So,
mythological.
What?
That's mythological, isn't it?
Warhammer, yeah, but it's just pretty good. We like that. I dated this woman who was a Warhammer fan, right? She had a massive living room full of Warhammer stuff, right? I wish I'd have just played a Warhammer all night instead of something else.
You should have scooped them up and put them in your bag.
More fun.
You'd have been a wealthy man.
She did do me a good curry that evening.
Oh wow.
So hang on before I ask you two something, right? Did I tell you last week that I didn't tell you that last week? I'm one of the actors in a new Channel 4 series about a cold case in Bristol. Did I tell you this?
No.
You didn't reveal any details.
Right, yeah. Basically, I'll tell you a bit more. So, what happened in what happened in the late 1960s? Right, there was a cold case in Bristol. There was 20,000 men who had to have their handprints and all the rest of it. Right, and they didn't find the murderer. Right, they found the murderer now due to DNA. The guy is 93 and he's being put on trial in June. Oh, well, it is June. He's being put on trial now. He's 93, and he's being charged for the murder of this person in the 1960s. And I'm playing the actor who's investigated. And I've got my handprints and all the rest of it. And I'm quite proud of that. Yes, and the other two actors, one is Hollywood level, and there's another guy in it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. I'll let you know when it's out.
So you're a murderer.
They have intimated that they're not going to have me as the murderer, but I'm the only actor who's actually been fingerprinted and hand done. So
doesn't look good.
It does. It looks really good. We've actually I can show you some proof. Look at that. They let me keep one.
Oh, now look.
But hang on to that. You might need that in the future.
Yeah, I might need that in future. Yeah, South Wales Police. Right, Goff, anything you want to say?
I was going to say there's a tremendous amount of people involved in these battles. It's just incredible, really, because you've got not only have you got 100,000 soldiers on one side, you've got all the people supporting them.
Yes.
All the horses and the food. I mean, it's just astounding, isn't it?
It's unbelievable, and I always remember. Can I just two points here, because I go put some of my university stuff into this in a sec. But I always remember being corrected by a history buff in Barry called Gerald Burdett. I was giving a talk and I was 16 and I was talking about Owen Glyndŵr. And he asked me a trivia question. He said, how big do you reckon Owen Glyndŵr's army was? And I said, it must have been about 30,000 strong. Anyway, he waited to the end and he said, look, Carl, you need to do a little bit more research. An army, if Owen Glyndŵr had 30,000 men in Wales, right, in the revolt of Owen Glyndŵr, when the population of Wales was something like 200,000, right, you can think that that's basically a third of every single man in Wales was in Owen Glyndŵr's army. Who would have fed them? And then I realised it was more like 1,000, right? After my research years later. And Goff is exactly correct. An army this size, a Roman army of 86,000, is incredibly huge. The amounts of wagons, supplies, supporters is huge. And one of the things I mentioned, what did I mention in this? The scorched earth thing of Fabius the Delayer, where Italian farms are devastated and caused massive homelessness. One of the things when I was in Leicester University, one of our modules was looking at excavating Italian Roman villas, and the scorch marks and the destruction was still to be seen in the archaeology from this period on farms. And this lasted for hundreds of years, this scorched earth policy. And but it did the trick. Finally, Anne, I'm just going to mention to everybody online, thanks for joining us online, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Anne, anything you want to say?
Just that I looked up the battle when the first tanks were used, and it was either Chambray or Villiers.
Chambray. It was Chambray.
Chambray.
Yeah.
And,
thanks for that, Anne. Was that 1916?
17 it was, yeah.
17, okay, thanks.
All right.
Well done.
Well, I think my is it October? I know one of my relatives was killed in October near Chambray.
Well, we'll have to look that stuff up. Hang on. So first tank battle. You'll probably come up with Kursk. First tank battle of World War One, where yeah, it was Cambrai, 1917, and it was actually the Mark V, not the Mark One, and it's Cambrai. So yeah.
Okay. So anyway, it's food for thought. It's always a lot of information. You're very good at numbers, but I'm dyslexic when it comes to numbers.
The problem is I'm going to quote something that somebody said when I had my class in Lampeter. They said, don't remember numbers in history, just remember the facts and the boundaries of what we're looking at, and they're dead correct. So the main thing is, even if you never remember any of the dates, you know that Hannibal had elephants, he marched over, he defeated the Romans, he was very successful, and Hannibal was eventually defeated. The territory of Carthage then went to Rome. The Romans were quite bloody, and in many ways, the Romans after Cannae were actually venting revenge on the Carthaginians by setting light to the city and killing 750,000 people, which is not nice, but that's what the Romans did. That's how the Romans exacted revenge. And in fact, finally, this is what the Mongol hordes did as they're coming across Asia into Europe. They basically said, look, if you resist the Mongols, we're going to kill all of you. If you don't resist the Mongols, you're going to live, right? That's it. There's no other way to look at it than that. Okay, then. Are there any other questions from Goff and Richard or Henry?
No, that was very good.
Okay, I really appreciate that, and no doubt I will see you all next Wednesday. And thank you very much, Goff and Richard, Henry, Nostar. Night.
Night.
Have a good week.
Night.
Night.
And what did you want to say to me afterwards?
I forgot.
Oh, don't worry, Anne. Anyway, you'll remember. Just message me. Night.
But as far as the thing it concerns, yeah, I'll message you. It has nothing to do with that, I don't think. It's probably some irrelevant rubbish. But we'll probably meet up. The Barry group at Cowbridge sometime soon. Okay.
All right then.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Okay then. Anyway, thanks for that, Anne.
Yeah, on a Thursday. Well, I'm trying to make it a Thursday. Next week will be fine, but you will have the ghost walk as well.
Yeah.
On Saturday.
But that's on a Saturday, yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta get to I gotta get to Barry next week earlier on to tidy up the studio anyway, because I've got some film work coming on. So.
Oh right, yeah. Oh, I was going to say, if I had a coin of David Tennant as Doctor Who, would you buy it? How much would you pay me for it? I bet you've got one already.
The problem is I'm not basically, I try not to collect things anymore. So
I'll try someone else online.
Actually, send me the details. I know somebody who might want to buy it as long as it's a decent price. What you want for it?
Well, I think it cost me £10.
Well, I know somebody who might be really interested in it. He's called Gary. He collects these types of things. So if you could send me a photograph of it, I'll say, Gary, do you want this?
All right, and the Daleks.
Oh yes, nice.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's the right time. I don't want to leave it too long because it'll be out of fashion, but anyway.
All right then.
So I'm trying to get out.
No, don't worry, Anne, it's fine.
So
anyway, thanks for working out with Cambrai. That was great.
Okay. Bye-bye then.
Okay, night, Anne. So we're looking at the Battle of Cambrai. We've got that in Cambrai. We've got the battle. That was the 20th of November, 1917. all the way to the 3rd of December 1917. Oh God. There was another Battle of Cambrai as well. Anyway, folks, an interesting point here, right? Interesting point on this Wikipedia entry. It says World War II was followed by reconstructions and a rapid developing economy and population, abruptly reversed by the 1973 oil crisis. In peace times, things are good. In wartime, they're not. I've got to see to the animals, and Cambrai was apparently known to the Romans. Anyway, I've gone right off on one. I'm going to get something to eat. I'm going to see in my chat box. Nothing in the chat box. Everybody online, really appreciate you being online with us. We had a big chunk of people at one stage. Very few of you have actually subscribed or joined or liked, which is a shame. We get 20 people online, and yeah, there's only 3 likes in there, which is really odd. Anyway, so I'm going now, but anyone, don't forget, we're here next Tuesday and next Wednesday at 7 o'clock, just after 7 o'clock. So join us on YouTube, Archaeology Live. Thank you very much. So this is Carl-James Langford. We've got a fan club as well on Facebook. Look at the Carl-James Langford fan club on Facebook if you want to join that. And many thanks. So I'm looking on here. That's off 1. That's off 2. That's off 3. Nothing in that chat box. Nothing in that chat box. Close that chat box, and that chat box is closed. Nothing to record. Done. Diolch yn fawr i chi.